Welcome to the Embodiment Podcast. This show is for you if you see the body as more than a brain taxi. It's for people interested in coming home to the body as a holistic aspect of who we are and how we live. Episodes contain practical tips, exercises you can take away, and interviews with embodiment specialists from around the world. I'm your host, Mark Walsh. So this week there's a slightly different introduction to the Embodiment Podcast. So welcome. The guest will be on in a few minutes. So I'm going on a little world tour, partly for plays, for holiday with my wife, and partly to do a number of sort of gigs, a number of trainings in places I don't normally train. So I've been looking at the audience figures for this podcast, and people are listening from all over the world. And this would be a really good chance for a whole bunch of you, because I'm going to a lot of countries that have high listener figures, to meet up. And that could be a training, or it could just be for a coffee, or if you fancy showing me the sites, then I'd appreciate that. Virtual love is nice, but it's also nice to get together in an embodied way. So I'm going to be at the Integral Conference just outside of Budapest. I think that's the 22nd to the 27th of May. So that's the first one. So maybe I'll catch you there. That is just going to be a majorly cool festival. I'm doing a little piece of it, but mostly I'll just be hanging out in the sauna and swimming naked in the lake, etc. Singing naked in the lake. So yeah, it'd be nice to meet you there if you're somewhere in Central Europe, or if you're into Ken Wilber's stuff, and there's going to be loads of cool embodiment stuff at that. Next chance to catch me, I'm going to be near Valencia in Spain for Paul Linden's intensive, the 18th to the 23rd of June. So of course, if you're interested in embodiment work, Paul Linden's a total master. You could look that up. If you Google Paul Linden Spain or message me, you'll get details of that, or you can just again meet me for lunch, very possible. After that, for the next few weeks, I'm in Japan. So I'm in Tokyo the 24th to the 28th, I think. And if anyone's in Japan, I would love to meet some people there, particularly yoga teachers, but anyone who just wants to hang out. I know we get some hits from there. Don't be shy, okay? I found the Japanese to be the hardest to contact in stepping forward, guys. So do step forward, do a little bit of yoga with me, hang out, we'll eat some sushi, whatever you guys recommend. Japan's a country, it's a little bit scary, in terms of, I know it's very safe, but in terms of traveling there for the first time, we do some Aikido there as well, obviously. So if anyone wants to join me for that, then let me know. I'm going to be in Kyoto area, and then ending up in Hiroshima, kind of that will be towards the sort of 7th, 8th July, something like that, 9th, 10th. Then I'm going to Australia. I'm teaching in Sydney on the 14th and 15th of July, one for trainers and coaches, one for yoga teachers. And then I'm going to be going around Brisbane, Byron Bay, Gold Coast, just tourism, and then teaching a full embodied yoga principles teacher training in Melbourne, 21st, 22nd and 23rd. Again, get in touch or look on the Embodied Yoga Principles Facebook group for more on those. And I'm going to be in Bali. That's pretty much just a holiday. So if anyone has holiday recommendations or wants to hang out in Bali, I'm going to be there with my wife, July and the beginning of August. And then I'm going to be in New Zealand. So probably the South Island first, around about the 15th, 16th, 17th of August. And then traveling around. Again, I'm going to be on my own for that one. My wife can get a visa. So if anyone in New Zealand wants to hang out, then let me know. We're doing a teacher training, Embodied Yoga Principles, the 31st of August to the 3rd of September. And then I'll be flying home. So bit of an epic tour, mostly for fun, a couple of cheeky gigs. It's basically a sabbatical with my wife. I thought it would be a shame not to do a couple of cheeky EYP gigs and things there. So if you want to meet me at any of those, then just get in touch. So you can email me through Embodied Yoga Principles or through Embodied Facilitator course. Reach out on the Facebook group as well. As I said, it's really cool knowing people are listening, and loads of people are now listening to this. What would be even cooler is meeting some of them in person in their home countries. So don't be shy. If you're thinking, I don't know who you are or whatever, then just have a coffee. It'll be cool. All right. So enjoy the podcast. So on the show today, Anita Teresa. So Anita is the founder of the Sex and Medicine Summit. She is an educator and coach working with sexuality, integrative sexuality, embodied sexuality, future of male-female leadership, all sorts of interesting subjects. Anita, welcome.
Thank you.
How did you get interested in working with the body?
My father is actually a physicist, and most of my family are all academics and in the sciences. And from a young age, I was interested in, I just had a very strong erotic imagination. I didn't really fit in. I always wanted to dance, and dancing really wasn't encouraged in my family. Somehow I just kept following my curiosity over many years of different practice of yoga and somatics and dance, and then going into sacred sexual arts and training. It just got deeper and deeper, and it's just an infinite field, actually.
It just keeps opening up, doesn't it? It's sort of, I almost feel like on this podcast, I'm opening up all these different embodiment fields to people that may not have heard of all the different possibilities. And I almost feel bad about that, because the more you open up, the more it keeps opening up, right?
Definitely.
So I listened to another interview with you, actually, and sort of prep for this, where, and tell me if I misunderstood this, but you were talking about when you work with embodiment, sometimes sexuality is almost the last thing that comes up. Like my experience, for example, so I'd be in a business group and I'd be talking about leadership in the body, and I'd talk about stress, and then relationship would come up, and it was almost at one point like a topic I was staying away from, because my sense is when you say body, some people think sex, so that there's a stage of being an embodiment teacher where you go, well, let's talk about everything else but that. And then it just becomes more and more kind of obvious that it's something, as we get more embodied, we can get more sexual, our relationship to sexuality changes.
Totally. That's why I did the Sex and Medicine Summit, was because I was working in the hospital setting, and I was working with patients with chronic illness. And I found that the more I guided them into their pleasure, into their sensuality, the healthier they became, or they felt less pain, sometimes no pain. Sometimes these people would spontaneously stand up and start dancing, even if they had a walker or were in a wheelchair. It was really remarkable. So I was like, why are we not talking about sensuality and pleasure and sex? Because it's glaringly missing. And it's just part of our taboo. It was part of a taboo in our culture. That's really the only reason.
Yeah, I felt like I was adding to that taboo by not mentioning it. You know, like I'd be doing an embodiment training, and I'd be like, I want to be taken seriously as an embodiment teacher, so I'm not going to talk about this. And then I just went, oh, for God's sake, Mark, you know, there's a point I got to and went, this is just part of being human. And clients would come to me and say like, oh, you know, I've been on this embodiment leadership program, but my love life has improved a lot. And because we've been working with yin and yang, or just getting in the body, and they'd say, oh, I'm having more sex or better sex or whatever, more connected sex. And I'd be like, okay, well, that's a nice side benefit, you know, and it just kept happening as a sort of side benefit of being embodied. So now, the last few years, I sort of said, you know what, let's not deny that. Let's just acknowledge that that's there as part of the human experience.
I love that. And I think people trust you more and respect you more when you talk about it openly versus implying and then kind of like brushing over it. An example of that is a yoga teacher that I had for a while, and she was one of the only if not the only yoga teacher I knew who during yoga nidra, she would say, and let the light fill your genitals, you know, and no one else ever says the word genitals.
Yeah. I mean, even with a body scan, you know, I hear a lot, this is sort of subtle sex shaming, and your lower abdomen, I'm like, do you mean my cock?
I keep going lower.
I'm like,
lower now.
What are you doing? You missed a bit. I think you missed a bit.
Your naughty bits. Yeah.
Belly button. There's some other stuff there. You know, like, why are you not? We don't have to make a big deal of it. But, you know, yeah, so there's a sort of subtle missing out, isn't there?
We should totally do a parody sketch of that, like a yoga teacher.
That'll be fun.
Trying to get more comfortable talking about sexuality and just keeps implying. I think it'd be great. We really need that.
It's really interesting, because when I started this podcast, I was like, okay, I'm going to have dancers on and martial artists, and you know, I was looking at who to get on, and part of me again felt that like, oh, but if I get tantra people on, or you know, embodied sexuality people on, that's going to change the tone of it. You know, actually, the last interview I did before you was from an expert in kink. She's kind of a dominatrix type woman, but from a very embodiment point of view. And I just thought, I'm going to have everyone on, because I feel like this is worth talking about, and everyone's interested in it as well. Let's be honest, right? Yeah. Like, it's not a boring topic to many people.
And I feel like the holistic community, the people interested in embodiment, really are the ones who need to lead the conversation, because otherwise it's entertainment, the entertainment industry, the porn industry, or you know, people that are extreme clinicians in the medical world, and they keep it really dry and really boring, and you know, kind of dehumanized.
There's no, yeah, like, so, I mean, who's the alternative, right? Like, if this isn't done by embodiment teachers, either porn as educator, and I don't demonize all porn, but that's not my vibe, but it's probably not the best educational tool.
Right. It's not an education, it's just entertainment. So it's not the same
goal.
It's
not the same goal, right? Or education, which isn't really interested in pleasure. It's just biology. Like, at school, this is a vagina. And I'm like, yeah, but how do I make it wet? Like, my interest's pretty different as a 14-year-old in biology than the biology teachers, It's like a different vibe. No sense of pleasure in sex education. So just, these are what the bits are called. It's like, well, I don't need to know what it's called. I need to know how to, do when I'm down there. So it's not the name that counts. Okay, so what does good kind of holistic sex education look like then? If it doesn't look like medicine or porn, what does that look like?
So much of it is resensitizing the body, because we're all so much of, I don't know why, our culture, whether it's because of technology or just the values we've inherited, but there's this vast anesthesia, this dissociation from the body. And when people begin to resensitize and reconnect to the sort of neurological underpinnings of the entire body and the capacity for pleasure and sensation in every single part of the body, every down to the atoms, basically, it's a totally different way of living. It's a completely different experience of intimacy and pleasure and consciousness, really. I think resensitizing is a pillar of that, and you can't do that through talking alone. It has to be experiential. It's
a skill, isn't it? It's like driving a car or something. There's a skill. It's not a academic subject.
Right.
So we live in this kind of crazy disembodied world, and as you say, various historical reasons for that. And like one way that shows up in all kinds of ways. So it showed up as like bad leadership in the business world. It might show up as health issues. It might show up as relationship issues, and it's definitely going to show up as sex issues, because that's so much an embodied thing that if we dissociate it, if we're numb, then it's just going to show up that way. That's one. And two, it's kind of motivating, right? Like, sex is one of the, like, even people who are pretty disembodied often still have some interest in sex. Like, it's like, this is a motivating reason to get involved in the body. It's like yoga. Why would I do that? Okay, stretching. Okay, it's supposed to be good for me. Okay, but blowjobs. Okay, now you're talking. Now you've got my attention.
Now you got my attention.
It's like, right? Well, sorry, what? Yeah.
Well, it's sad. It's funny. I heard a statistic recently. I think this is just in the U.S. that a survey of men between the ages of 18 and 25.
Yeah.
They were asked whether they would be interested in having a sex robot as a companion. In lieu of a human girlfriend or human partner. And can you guess the percentage of guys that...
Oh, God, I'm not... I don't know, 30%.
30%?
Yeah. How many guessed? How many wanted a robot?
It was 25%. Which
okay, not far off.
That's 1 in 4. That's really high.
Well, what does that say? I mean, it's just weird and funny and sad, but why is it sad? Let's look at that. So either the quality of people's relationships is so bad, like, is it just that just most women aren't fun to be in relationship with?
You gotta wonder. It's like, what? This is really high. In Japan, it's already kind of an epidemic. People are not coupling.
Yeah, the not coupling thing. And Denmark pays you money to have kids now. They're wanting more. There's like a whole campaign on Danish TV about, they give you like a free holiday so you can go away and have sex.
Yeah, I saw that.
Hilarious. It's great, really good Danish dry humor. We like it. But I mean, the other confusion there is the guys think that is a replacement, right? That's the really sad thing. The idea that if sex is viewed in a disembodied mechanistic way, then and maybe that is the sex they've had. Like, I've seen a lot of women get upset with the sex robots, and I think the women who are most upset are the ones who see them as competition. Like that's my slightly offensive take on it. That, like, if you're offering something more than a sex robot, it's not competition. In the same way as some women get upset by sex workers, right? Like, the most vehemence I've ever seen against sex workers has come from women. And I wonder why that is.
To be fair, sometimes men are jealous of women's sex toys. It goes both ways.
Yeah, yeah, for
like,
sure.
You don't need that. Why do you need that vibrator? I can do that better than that vibrator. But it isn't about competition until you see that actually it is a competition. I mean, it's literally these boys are like, I'd rather have an animate object, or it's pretty
And some women would rather have vibrators than a man, right? And now, this could be to do with the men being terrible lovers and the ease of orgasm. And I've seen women definitely get addicted to vibrators and not bear orgasm with partners. But also, again, it's like, if you're having disembodied sex, a robot is as good as a person you're objectifying. Like that, I mean, I don't know, upset listeners will be offensive or, well, maybe a little offensive. But it's like, that's the really sad thing here, is that they think that is a replacement. You know what I mean? Because it's like
as good or good enough. It'll do the job, basically. It does the most basic biological function of sexual stimulation. And that's kind of, okay, so...
That's logical, though, if they are having completely disembodied sex.
If that's all sex is, then I get it. But then it's like, well, there's this entire vast universe to explore in, and which I want to inspire more people to explore. Yeah. I want people to be curious enough to be like, if I touch that person's body, if I touch my own body this way, and I do this kind of breathing, and I slow down my breath and my heartbeat, what will happen then? Just this basic curiosity about the body, which...
Okay, let me jump in and play devil's advocate then. So if I'm like, I'm like a young guy who's watched a lot of porn, and I have I'm debating buying a sex robot, and I say to you, hey, what's the problem? Like, girlfriends are a lot of trouble, and it's a lot of hassle, and like, you can't even have sex with them quite often because they they have their own opinions and moods and blah blah blah. Why would I bother? How is embodied sex different from a sex robot? Now, obviously, I'm playing devil's advocate here, but where would you start with that?
You're not going to move the camera and be like, "There's a box with the robot in it."
No, my wife wouldn't tolerate that.
Well, probably, I like to go the route of inspiration versus shaming or being like, "Oh, you should." Normal human beings don't do that.
Yeah, what's wrong with you?
Sexuality, there's so much variety. If you look at human sexuality across the globe, across many, many, many cultures, there is a massive amount of variety of what turns people on, what's interesting, what's sexy, what's not sexy, who initiates, So, but in this case, I would say, well, if at one point you're feeling it's feeling a little empty, it's feeling a little flat to you, it's feeling boring and predictable, then come find me and I will, I'll give you some guidance, because at the end of the day, even if if you predictably know you can get off in the same exact way every day, some men will just go with that because
we could be more predictable than women in that way, for sure.
But they don't want to put in the effort of anything beyond that. Most of their energy is going toward mental output or input, and it's not in the body. So it's like, even the sexual stimulation is like a mental stimulation. It's like the bare minimum of stimulation to the body, if that makes sense. So but I would say, a lot of these hormones like oxytocin that come from deep bonding sex that only get released in certain specific circumstances. Certain hormones, also gonadotropins that get released from the pituitary gland, only happen in certain circumstances of high ecstasy.
Sure.
Even drug use can't force the pituitary gland to secrete those hormones.
Yeah.
So you can't contrive it. You can't force it to happen in any other way. So basically, I would say you're really missing out. You're missing out on this massive, incredible opportunity, for ecstasy, for pleasure, for bonding, for deep satisfaction.
Yeah. I mean, connected sex is just better than disembodied unconnecting sex. I mean, that's, one very good argument. I'd say once you've felt the difference between the two, and I'm not against a cheeky wank here and there, but once you've felt the difference between the two, it's a really fairly significant difference in feeling,
Yeah. It's kind of like, do you want to eat plastic, like a plastic hamburger, or would you rather have a gourmet meal?
Well, I was explaining a gender difference to a female friend. She was saying, I can only have deep connected sex. And I said to her, well, I like really good French cuisine, but if I'm hungry, I'll eat at McDonald's. And she said, looks me in the eye and went, I'm never that hungry. And and I know that, I'm talking in generalizations and cliches and stereotypes, but, to me, that I have definitely seen, not in all women, but a gender difference between that. Something is better than nothing. And also the big difference I see is just women just have way more choice, particularly young women than men. Like a lot of guys, they just really struggle to get any sex.
Yeah.
Whereas a young, relatively attractive woman just isn't going to have that problem. She's going to have a very different set of problems.
Sure. Yeah. The same survey of 18 to 25-year-old girls or women, it was something like 7% of them.
Well, they already have sex robots. They have men who are willing to do anything they want in exchange for a little bit of pussy. They don't need sex robots. They already have them. It's like, no offense, but
if only they knew that. If only they knew.
I think some of them definitely do.
If only women knew that we could pretty much have anything we wanted,
Yeah, I mean, it does break the monopoly a little bit. Do you know what I mean? Like that's, again, it's part. I'm being half joking here, but there's a break in the monopoly in that way, isn't there? That I do know this. I can see why women would be angry about this. Who are using it in a transactional way, who are using sex in a transactional rather than disconnected way. I mean, sex is sold universally by women far more than men, and when men, that true or false, like cross culturally, is generally women who are selling sex or men to other men.
Well, here's what's interesting. In most matriarchal societies, if not all of them, prostitution really doesn't exist. Why? Because women have resources. They have all the resources they need, typically. And two, because sex is encouraged, sexual exploration is encouraged early on. And there's no taboo or stigma around a woman or girl who enjoys sex. So there's no such concept as a slut. I think actually women are highly sexual, and just in the cultures that we are raised in, it's not encouraged, and it's
sure.
And so there is a need, so to speak. There's a demand for prostitution, and there'll always be that if the resources are not if there aren't sufficient resources flowing to women, first of all, and if sex is repressed.
So I think you've got two pieces of the picture there, right? Like completely agree with you in terms of like sex positivity and, that being kind of, part of the picture there. And I feel like there is still so much sex shame around. We don't live in sex positive cultures, no matter what people say. Like, I think I told the story in another podcast, but the first time I heard a female friend of mine stand up, I'd done a training on attraction for men, embodied attraction. I brought her along as my sort of guest embodied woman to help out. And she stood up and she said, I love cock. And I was a little bit, oh my God, and of course, what the most natural thing in the world, if she didn't not every.
Like you would hope so, right? I mean,
yeah, you're a heterosexual woman. Of course you do. Like, otherwise, we're not going to have much luck here with the human race. And you can just see like every man in the room, all of which thought they were groovy personal growth people, had just never heard a full-grown, full-blooded, unashamed woman. And then she was like, and I love thick ones, I love this, I love that, and I love sucking them. And she was just talking about it for a couple of minutes, and there wasn't a man in that room who didn't have an embodied fight-flight response.
It was like
they were just like, and I'm like, yeah, that's what's wrong with a woman liking sex, of course. And the fact that even in 2018 that is still surprising to a group of open-minded people in liberal Brighton, which is like Boulder or somewhere. We've still got issues as a society.
Yeah. True. Yeah, I've been researching this one contemporary matriarchal society in China called the Musuo, and it's a clanship. They've been around for thousands of years, right on the Tibetan border. So they're way up in the highlands. They didn't go through the Chinese Revolution. They were unaffected by all the main political stuff. Yeah. So they preserve their culture, and that society, the girls choose when they come of age, they get their own room. Boys never get their own room. They always, the men sleep in a communal room together, typically. So it's the girl who initiates sex and brings the lovers that she wants to her bedroom at night. And they don't have formal marriage. They have what's called walking marriage.
Yeah.
So all the sexual initiation rites and rites of passage and rules around mating and sex are completely different. And you don't have, you have very happy women. And that's
but I mean, it's always women that choose. I mean, like, I'm going to give a counter argument here. Like, it's not I've studied culture cross-culturally, both in person and theoretically, and there are similarities across cultures. There aren't many matriarchal societies in the world. There's very few in very unusual situations normally. And it's always women that choose anyway, because, biologically, pregnancy is more expensive than sperm, right? Like, it's a hell of a big deal to get pregnant, and it's not that big a deal to shoot a load. So, I mean, isn't there some biological stuff at work? I mean, I don't buy the sort of liberal American social constructivism around this hardcore. I've definitely seen enough variants to go, okay, we're pretty socially malleable sexually, but not entirely, right? Like, for example, symmetrical women with a certain waist-hip ratio are universally admired, even though the size of that person may change. So, I mean, isn't there also just some biological stuff at work here?
In what sense? What do you mean? What are you asking exactly?
Well, you were talking about a society where women choose, for example. Mm-hmm. Like you say, women do the choosing and the men come to them. But, I mean, that's the same everywhere. I mean, short of places where women are just totally abused and treated like objects, which to some extent happens in a lot of places, but some worse than others. We don't live in ISIS-controlled territory. Like, I mean, women do choose because just of that biological difference, no?
Well, what's interesting is, women do choose, but it's much more plain and direct, and it's just right there.
Yeah.
You don't have this, there isn't this double standard of like, oh, well, a woman who likes sex is somehow considered a slut, or a whore. You don't have that double standard in at least this culture.
Yeah.
And they're encouraged actually to enjoy themselves. And because it's an informal marriage, she could have a child from someone and not really know who the father is because she's had multiple lovers. And it doesn't really matter because who ends up raising the children, interestingly, are the brother, like the uncles of the children.
Okay.
And the biological father may maintain a connection with his children, but he's actually busy raising his sister's children.
Sure. And I guess this is like a small sort of village type environment, right? So that works if everyone's related because everyone's looking after each other's children. The genes are still going forward. There's a kind of biological drive there. And I could definitely see why at some point a man went, hang on, particularly when we look at wealth, and I'm guessing they don't have a lot of inherited wealth, because as soon as you'd have inherited wealth as a guy, you're like, okay, I want to be pretty bloody sure that my inherited wealth is going to my son. Therefore, I need to control the woman's sexuality to know it's just my sperm that's there. Like,
and that could have been the crux of the transition from matriarchal societies, which predated patriarchy for many, much longer time, to what we think of as modern patriarchy, which is more consolidation of wealth and resources and sexual ownership.
Uh-huh.
And that paternity is really important versus maternity. It's like in the Muslim tribe anyway, they're very, it's like all about the matriarch, and everyone pertains to each clan where those matriarchs live. It's like everything is built around the mother. So the paternity just doesn't really matter because property is passed down through the daughter. And you're right in that they're not a wealthy necessarily society in that typical sense of material wealth. But no one's going hungry. There's no starvation. There's no homelessness. There's no rape. Very little, if any, rape or theft. So it's a trade-off. It's a different way of life, obviously. And it's utopian. It's not a utopia, but it
is fascinating to look at other possibilities, isn't it? Just we tend to think of our own as the inevitable, and I think that's one of the great beauties of travel, isn't it? And tell me if I'm way off in any of this. I'm certainly not an expert. It's certainly interesting to look at other cultures and go, oh, okay, they do that differently. Maybe it's not inevitable.
Yeah, I agree.
So sort of back to 21st century America then. You're in New York. What's the state of kind of, we have the birth pills. There's always other sort of things that didn't exist. There's been, what are we up to? Third wave feminism now? Like fourth maybe?
3.5 wave.
3.5. So things are pretty different, both in terms of, the biology is the same, but in terms of the social conditions, the economics, things like birth control, the cultural movements that have come in. Where is sexuality at, do you think, in 21st century America?
Oh God, it's such a mess. It's depressing.
You have a job for a reason, right? Like you did this
Yeah,
conference
like,
for a
there's
reason.
lot of
You
work
didn't. You didn't
to
when everything's perfect. Let's go to huge effort to make a conference. So, you know, how are some of these things in this very modern environment? You know, where people of very aware. There's gender politics. There's identity politics. There's, you know, on the one hand, there's women. I just the gender wars. I'm getting really tired of it. It's like.
Yeah.
Women are resenting men, men are resenting women. There's this kind of weird war going on right now. And it's so sensitive around anything about this topic.
I'm a bit, so I don't toe a particular party line when it comes to these things. I really have actually a lot of empathy and compassion for what men are going through. I've worked with women for so long, and I get what women have gone through, and I understand the narrative very, very well. Being a woman who's gone through sexual harassment and all that.
Yeah.
I mean, but now I'm like, man, you know, there's so many men. The bulk of men are just, in a sense, untrained or are kind of clumsy when it comes to interacting with women, and they're not malicious. These are not Weinstein men.
Yeah.
The men who should be the target of the most wrathful feminine communication are the men who typically are the most protected by their resources, by their cohort, who are entrenched in their their extreme perpetrating or predatorial ways. Not the bulk of men. The bulk of men are just kind of like, most of them are in a way victims too of the same.
You know, this gives me hope when I talk to a lot of women, like not on the internet, but just in the real world. It just seems like most women still like men, and that gives me hope. And you know, it sounds crazy to have to say that, but it almost doesn't seem that way. And I feel like what I've seen develop in the last couple of years is a framing that I really disagree with, and maybe we can disagree civilly here if you don't, but that's the framing that most men are victimizing women. And the idea of women as a sort of persecuted group, in the same way as we might say, I don't know, gay people have been a persecuted group for a long time. And I would just disagree with that. And maybe that, you know, you say, oh, it's my male privilege. You've never been sexually harassed. And it's like, well, yeah, that's true. And, you know, also there's other things, that massive privileges that women have that men don't. You know, boys do worse in education than girls today in Britain. Paternity kind of statistics, criminal statistics around men in the military dying. You know, it's the men who suicide rates are several times higher than men. So there's all these ways in which men are suffering, and all these really valid ways in which women are suffering. You know, like just the vast epidemic of sexual assault that's out there. And it feels like there's an empathy collision where one won't hear the other's pain. And the current framing is that, okay, one group have oppressed the other group, so therefore you fucking feel guilty and apologize. And we have no interest in it. And that just seems fundamentally unhelpful when we have to all get on and most people are just liking each other and decent human beings and trying to get on with things. I don't know, a bit of a rant. Tell me your take on this, and feel free to disagree with me.
I mean, I think they're interconnected. So our suffering is interconnected and mutual. We can't, for example, if you're a man who has repeatedly violated a woman, let's say her boundaries, you've forced yourself a couple times on a woman, you've date raped someone, maybe when you were like 18, and you're haunted by that, and stuff is still kind of turning around, and you haven't had an outlet, and you don't know quite what to do with that because there's such an intense shaming around it at this point in society. You are the evil, demonic, you know, you're this horrible creep who is to be punished and go to jail for life. And I'm not trying to downplay sexual violence, and yet I think there has to be room for what our mutual healing, because we're all, if you violated someone, you've in a sense violated yourself as well.
I mean, doing violence also traumatizes people. I've worked with the military a lot, and that's true in, you know, non-sexual violence as well.
Totally. So the victim card thing, I also find it to be limiting. I think there's a place for people to share legitimate rage and to hold accountable and to all of those things, for the legal system to be working properly. And it's like, we're actually not going to experience full healing and reconciliation until the perpetrator, so to speak, in this case, internalized the internalized predator or aspects of that or shaming are also resolved, and they're interconnected. We can't have one without the other.
Yeah.
So the suicide, the increased suicide that men are going through, the drug abuse, like all these are symptoms of a deeper problem. And it's to me, it's wherever we have suppressed the feminine or denied or demoralized or demeaned the feminine in ourselves as human beings, whether it's a man or a woman, it's just not having honored and revered ourselves in that aspect.
Is there a risk it swings the other way? Because, you talked about the shaming of female sexuality, which I think still continues, the slut shaming. And I wonder if it will become almost a shaming of kind of active male sexuality. And that's what I've seen in places like Sweden and the Netherlands that are quite kind of developed in this narrative. And I would say developed, not just different. They've gone through a process that's healthy and really, really useful. And then it's like, men kind of get their balls cut off in those environments. I
see that too. Yeah.
Talk about that.
So here's a fun fact, which almost no one talks about or knows about. In my little research obsessions around ancient cultures, I found this whole trove of history around an ancient Anatolian culture that worshipped the goddess Cybele. Is an ancient Anatolian Mesopotamian goddess who later became known as Artemis. And in this society, if you wanted to be a priest, if you're a man, you wanted to be a priest, and in order to have political power of any kind, you had to become a priest. In order to become a priest, you basically had to be castrated. You had to go through a public ritual where your genitals were cut off and thrown into a fire. And many men went through this ritual. Many of them died. They bled to death. If they survived, they would grow their hair long. They would grow out their nails. They would wear long robes like a woman. So essentially, they really were emasculated.
Kind of like a Hollywood celebrity today. Got it.
literally emasculated. And this was going on for presumably thousands of years, if not at least centuries or up to 1,000 years or so. When this goddess was adopted by the Romans, they were like, "Oh hell no, you're not going to have our men get their balls cut off."
Romans are hyper masculine kind of culture, so yeah, that makes sense.
So they let them do this ritual, but not the genital part, and then eventually that religion died out. But it was centered around this. The central myth was the myth of Attis and Cybele. And in that myth, he gets his genitals cut off and he dies, and then he resurrects through his penis in a tree. And that's the evergreen tree. That's the origins of the Christmas tree.
That's the origin of the Christmas tree?
So when you look at the Christmas tree, just think of the male member coming back to life again. And so anyway, I think that's something that we don't know. It's not a common conception, especially among feminists. This like idea of like, oh, women have always been oppressed. It's like, well, not actually true. There was a time when men were also oppressed. When in certain parts of the world there was an overbearing female-centric society like this society. To me, it's fascinating that perhaps this is a reason why there was such a ferocious backlash at some point in history in Mesopotamia and all over the world against these female-centric religions and societies that worshipped the goddess and female sexuality. That it wasn't all just this utopian society, that perhaps there was a period of female overbearing feminine influence. Too much of the supreme mother, and men were like, fuck that, we want the supreme father now. Like, we're ready for we're like tired of the great mother, okay?
Yeah. There's nothing more violent than a woman protecting her children, in my experience, and nothing more terrifying. And like, I see that archetype really coming to the fore, the kind of vicious mob mentality. And it's like, well, don't we have a legal system? I mean, I'm all for someone that's raped someone being taken to jail. I'll fucking help you do that. Like, what do you need? But I'm seeing a sort of viciousness come out, which is almost the return of the vengeful kind of feminine vibe. It's a Carly-esque vibe to some of the stuff I'm seeing on the internet. I think the other thing that's tricky for guys is like, if you grew up pretty working class and your family were fairly poor, I'm online the other day and I see one of my rich North London female friends kind of talking about being oppressed. And I'm thinking, really? You grew up in a 5-bedroom detached house in Hampstead? Like, it's a little hard for me to hear that you've had it so hard. Now, I'm not talking about a survivor of assault or someone that's really been through some nasty stuff, but I'm just seeing a lot of kind of, the women are in the best position they've ever been at in human history in the Western world. And yet there's this framing that there's like huge oppression happening. And it's not like Saudi Arabia. And that's hard to hear as a guy who kind of grew up fairly poor.
I guess it's not worth comparing, though. Like one can't be compared to the other in a way.
Well, it is if I'm being framed as part of a persecutory class who has to feel guilty and pay recompense emotionally on a daily basis, then yeah, I'm going to fucking compare. I'm going to say, well, if I'm not taking, I'm not asking you as a rich girl to take that on, then why should you ask me to take that on as a man?
Well, here's a fun scenario to play out in your mind. It's going to be fun.
Go for it. Go for it. I like the challenge. I'm challenging you. It seems like you can take it. I'm open to one back.
Yeah. So imagine that you were going to be set, like gay men ruled the world, and whatever they wanted was...
This is fun already. Like, this sounds amazing.
Like, whatever they wanted pretty much had, the most value or sway. So if you walk into a boardroom and this gay man is like in charge of the meeting, and he, like, after the meeting, he comes up to you and he grabs your balls and he's like, yeah, I want you to sleep with me tonight and I'll give you the job.
Yeah. I have been sexually harassed by gay men, so I don't have to imagine that. I live in the gay capital of England, and I have had gay men drunk sexually harass me. So this is not a theoretical situation for me.
You can imagine what that would be like, but it never goes away. It's not like contained to one part of the city or one aspect of life. It's in everywhere you go. Yeah. Every block you walk down, there's going to be a man whistling at you, being like, "Hey, baby, ooh, I want to see your cock," or like nasty things you really don't want to hear in the middle of your day when you're thinking about going to your job. Or imagine just every single day there was some version of that, and then let's say you have a penthouse suite. You got, you're not a gay man, but you like made it in whatever. But is it still legitimate for you to be like, I'm tired of this harassment?
And this is, I think, with some specific thing like that, absolutely. I'm not without empathy for that. I've heard far too many stories from sisters, girlfriends, my wife, just the daily bullshit hassles of being around that. Which I think is absolutely despicable. And, 100% we're on the same team. Like if that, something happened to a friend of mine recently, I was like, I will walk you to the police station. Like, how do I help you get this guy done? Like 100%. So I want to say that like up front. And here's the thing I'd put back to you while we're beautifully sparring. First of all, it's not analogous because in the instances... Okay, let me come at it at this angle. A Dutch friend of mine was complaining to me the other day that too many men wanted to have sex with her. And I said, are these men harassing you? She said, not really. One or two of them are persistent. I said, are they grabbing you? She said, no. I said, great, because I'm against that, same as you are, 100%. I said, so you're really complaining that you have too many sexual options here. And you're complaining that the men have to take all the emotional vulnerability to make the advance and then be rejected. I said, when was the last time you were rejected when you asked a man for sex? She said, never, it's never happened. I said, okay, exactly. So that position of massive privilege, to use the kind of common parlance, that most women are in, not the privilege to be harassed. Obviously, again, just for my angry feminist American listeners out there, underlining, we're both on the same team there. But the massive privilege of having sexual options and of not having to face daily rejection from being the one who constantly makes the advances, which is the situation men find themselves in. So your analogy about gay men and straight men isn't analogous.
In that sense, I see what you're saying. And this ties back beautifully to embodiment, because I find that
we better had soon, better we?
we got up into the rabbit hole here.
No, it's great. This is great because it's fun and it's civilized, and that's what's missing in dialogue. Like, we can argue and banter, and to me it feels respectful and fun. And I just would invite anyone listening to this who wants to join in to keep in that mood. That I find it brilliant.
I mean, disagree. I can only be this civil because I've done a lot of work around it. It's not that I used to still have a lot of rage toward men. I used to be very bitter and really fault men for all the problems in the world. I was one of those people.
Nice. I'm glad I met you now.
And then I did a lot of I did a lot of healing. And one thing that was a huge pivotal turning point, even more recently, was like over a year and a half ago. I did a summit on sex and pleasure and trauma, or the medicine of pleasure as a healing for trauma. And two of my colleagues flew out from California to New York. And while they were here, they gave me a session in sexological bodywork and trauma healing, a 4-hour on the naked on the massage table, going through layer through layer through layer. They're highly trained. One is a doctor, and they're just an incredible power team. And that was an extraordinary and pivotal experience where at the body level, at the deeper somatic level, I released a lot of rage. A lot of it just evaporated. It dissolved. I no longer was holding on to some of these residual feelings of resentment and bitterness.
I feel like, hurt people, right? The old cliche. And like, I do want to acknowledge that so many women have been hurt in a way that most guys just don't get. Having kind of worked in trauma work and had lots of people, like intimate students and friends and people talking to me, it's just like, I was just horrified when I started hearing, like, well, you were 15 the first time a guy kind of grabbed you in public. I just hear this continuously, and not the odd case. Like, this is, so I really want to acknowledge that there's huge pain there. And the problem is pain normally causes more pain, right? Unless people are willing to do the heroic work that you did, right?
It's unresolved, unintegrated trauma that is fueling a lot of it. Unfortunately perpetuates the very thing that we don't want. And that's what I see. That's the kind of shadow side of the Me Too movement and hopefully that'll change and it'll mature and it'll take a better direction. But right now, it's totally justified for people to.
Well, that's the difficult thing, I think. As long as we say that one group are the enemy and they've hurt us, then anything's just because it's self-defense, anything becomes justified. And I've seen how dark that way of thinking can get in kind of like ethnic conflicts I've been involved with, for example. And when there's a sense of like, well, they've wronged us, so we can do anything back. I think that's a terrifying narrative in many ways. The other thing is I see the resentment from the guys too. There's so many guys that just resent the power that women have, the power that they've been sexual beggars their whole life. I talk to young guys and they're like, I'm being nice on Tinder or whatever, and I'm just being abused. I'm just being insulted. And you look at the ratios, it's really interesting statistics, like for Tinder, for example, that 20% of the women are, 20% of the women are picking 80%. 80% of the men are fighting over 20% of the women. So essentially there's a small group of really well-laid men and a large group of very underlaid men who just feel like they're being manipulated, controlled, and they get, as someone who's made that shift from the out group to the in group, it's quite a big shift, and I can see why these young guys kind of get resentful, and that's no excuse for bad behavior, of course.
Of course not, but that's why it all goes back to embodiment and training. Because
so, what do we need? So we've done this sort of
not enough. I mean, I think if I hadn't done what I had done in terms of all the trainings I've taken, all the exploration into sexuality and trial and error, a lot of it is just like, well, okay, that was a mistake. I won't do that again, but I learned something. That it's given me a kind of confidence that totally and completely changes how men interact with me and how I interact with men, generally speaking. And it's just night and day. And I don't experience harassment from men anymore. I don't not that I attract it. It's just not able to come near me anymore. Or if a man is coming to me with an intention to get my attention in some way that isn't appropriate, it usually just transmutes within seconds. Because kindness, because confidence, because I don't have rage, I'm not demonizing this person, I'm just having a lot more compassion.
Yeah.
And being like, this is a human being who doesn't know how to communicate and is longing for something and yearning for connection and doesn't know how to get it. And that's suffering. That's hell. I mean,
it's a very Aikido thing here, like I've seen this in a martial arts context. If people don't feel like victims, it's very hard to be aggressive towards them. And that's without victim blaming. I'm imagining the angry people listening. But it's, what's been interesting about this conversation for me is I felt totally relaxed and safe to bring some quite challenging things to you in a way that I often wouldn't bother. I'd feel like, okay, there's no listening here. It's going to be too much fear, too much pushback. Like, and there is a very different response in my body to like, okay, I feel like I can engage with this person around a fairly hot topic. My only worry actually with this is the people listening who haven't. So it's like just kind of one-to-one, I feel completely relaxed. And that's certainly not always the case, even just discussing these things.
Well, isn't that interesting?
There you go.
That says a lot right there.
Listen, I feel like I've talked too much like a typical man, and I want to use your expertise. Like, what works? Like, what do you really recommend? What's really useful out there for kind of this kind of healing work? Or if someone's out there and they're going, look, I've done a bit of yoga, but I feel like I'm not really in touch with my sexuality. Like, what do you recommend?
There are so many more resources now. If you go online and start doing get on YouTube and look at some videos on Tantra and Taoism. There's some awesome men and women teachers sharing their wisdom. There's so many Tantra teachers out there. Of course, there's plenty of bad ones too. But
I was going to say a lot of them are crap, but go on.
A lot of them are crap. You need to be discerning. But a lot of what gets in people's way is shame around sex. So there's tons of shame blocking people from just exploring and expressing themselves. And I'm not saying that I'm totally shame-free and never comes up. I struggle with it too. Internalized messaging around, a woman who likes sex is supposed to be this like terrible, this fallen woman. Like this,
a red-headed Mary Magdalene harlot.
And a harlot. I love that word.
Mary Magdalene was always my favorite. She was always my favorite Mary. Isn't it funny that we split it to virgin? One Mary's a virgin and the other one's a whore. Doesn't that say something about life?
Of course. And they were probably both at the same time. Who knows if they were
probably the same person.
But yeah, I think, working through shame, if you're someone who likes, getting in a group context, there's so many communication tools. There's circling Europe, authentic communication.
Good guys, John and Marissa in Poland, good people.
Great. It's a great entree into erotic intelligence, erotic literacy, because if you can speak your truth, it's very erotic.
What if you're a guy and you hate all that kind of communication stuff?
Oh, I think you posted something like
other people are hell in the world of Star Trek.
Yeah, so if you're not into that, maybe kink is going to be a good place for you to explore. Maybe you need like hard contact. Maybe you need to learn to surrender. Maybe you need to get into your dom side or your sub side. I mean, whatever it does it for you. It's like everybody has a language. There's a good quiz I recommend. Erotic blueprint quiz.
Cool.
You find out there's 5 different types. A colleague of mine, Jaya, made it, and it's really, I think it's substantive and good and intriguing. So you find out, I'm like actually a kinky type, or I'm an energetic type. I need to do lots of breathing with my partner. I need to lie down on my back next to my partner and need to breathe for 20 minutes, holding their hand, listening to their heartbeat. Like that would get me in the mood. Or because everybody has a different nervous system set point around.
Particularly women, in my experience. I would say the mistake I made after one girlfriend was feeling, I've got this worked out now, and I was very confused when I had my second lover. At 17, it was like, what the fuck? This is like a whole different computer game. Like it was a whole different thing. And yeah,
I got to the top level last time. Now just
right. Like what the hell? I knew how to play this game, and how I can pull it out. Okay, cool. That's
and learn anatomy. I think that's important. Learn
anatomy, really? Why is that? Why is that better than taking a lesson in oral sex from a lesbian sex?
You can do that too, but I mean, people need to know anatomy. It's really fucking important to know anatomy.
To locate the fabled clitoris.
Many women don't even know what their clitoris is. Many men don't know where the clitoris is. They think it's a button, this like external button.
You seen that crazy graphic? I'm sure you have. Where it's like an octopus monster that just stretches around a woman's pelvis. It's fantastic. How can people find that? By Googling. It's the coolest thing ever.
Yeah, there's so much online now. Even Pornhub has a lot of educational, great material.
some great statistics as well. Pornhub has a blog, so I'm told, which has statistics on it's really interesting sociologically. I'd also point people to, is it called A Million Wicked Thoughts, like what people Google search? So there's some really interesting kind of observations and stats, like what countries like what porn, how racist we are sexually, and just because they just look at the data rather than what people say, because people lie. So I point people to those who are sort of geeky, data-y guys who kind of want to see some of the truth behind this stuff. Like, there's a couple of things I'd point you to. Not the porn, the data on it. It's fascinating. Okay. Tell me about we got a little time, so we got 10 minutes. Tell me a little bit about the conference you put together. So you put together this cool event, all different kinds of people. Why? Highlights. Tell us more.
Sex and Medicine Summit. We did a lot of online stuff. The first summit was all online. It was really great. It was mostly geared toward people in health and wellness. So we had a lot of doctors from all over the world. We had people from Latvia, right, Maine, parts of Pakistan, and mostly U.S., Europe, and Canada, of course, as you'd expect, because it was English, all in English. But what some of the really cool stuff I learned was some of the neuroscience stuff. I interviewed this famous, locally famous neuroscientist, Barry Komisarek. He had some breakthrough research around what happens in the brain during orgasm, and he stumbled on some information.
Nothing. That's what happens in my brain. That's why I love it.
Apparently, for women, it's very different than for men. Like, orgasm.
Noticed that. What if that's one of God's worst jokes, isn't it? When I want to kind of chill and be silent. Yeah, that's one of. Yeah.
So women's brains, like all these different parts, are lighting up during orgasm. But anyway, what was most interesting for me was he worked with people who had spinal cord injury, so they were paralyzed from the neck down or from the waist down, and presumably you would think they can't feel anything, right? So they wouldn't be able to orgasm. Wrong. They can still orgasm through some other part of the body, like touching the earlobe or self-stimulation, because there are
personal challenge. I hear that as a challenge. I'm a man. Personal challenge laid down. Activity for me and my wife to practice in Paris this weekend. I've got a trip to Paris with the wife this weekend established. Earlobe challenge accepted.
It just shows how malleable the nervous system is. We can move arousal to any part of the body at will, even not even touching the body. We can have orgasmic states, It's so fun. But
just on Skype. You can just
mad. He found out that there are 4 nerves that travel between the brain and the pelvis that are responsible for orgasm. And in both men and women, they connect to different parts, but they are all possible pathways of orgasm. And that means not everyone, like you were saying before, your first girlfriend, you thought you had everything down, and then you got your next lover and you're like, what? It's all different. Because she had a different nervous system matrix or configuration. And so she would orgasm more reliably from some totally other kind of stimulation than the other woman. And so that's why I say learn anatomy, because then you become more versatile as a lover, and it's more interesting. And we all who doesn't like novelty and variety? That's why this whole notion of young men wanting robots is like, I think they're going to get tired of that eventually.
I think they'll get bored of those. Maybe they'll the hair color can be changed and stuff like that, but
still not novel enough. Still not.
Not everyone likes novelty, but I certainly do. So I get that. And well done for continuing regardless of my juvenile distractions during that last piece on neuroscience. I just want to give you a gold star for that. That was impressive.
Juvenile was cute.
That was I'm having fun here. I hope you are too.
My wife's to the hotel. We're going to get down that earlobe.
I've got a Paris trip planned this weekend. We're going romance.
Great.
Anything else you'd like to talk about?
Well, just to kind of recap, I would say, resensitizing is one of the themes of embodiment. Resensitizing the body, learning to increase the amount of sensation you can hold in your body, especially intense visceral emotion. Hold that is such a great skill for everyone. It doesn't matter what walk of life. Learn anatomy. You know, like whatever it takes to get through shame, whether it's just trial and error or talking to someone.
How do you get through shame? If someone says, I have sex shame, I can't imagine doing the cock thing I talked about earlier, the woman standing up and saying, how do you get through shame?
I think by voicing it in front of someone that you trust and being seen, even if you can hold space for the shame, meaning like you can hold the emotion of shame or the state, and you can hold compassion at the same time, the shame disappears. And then it's just like, oh, it's not a big deal. That really is not a big deal.
Yeah. I didn't die. You experience it. You're not, because shame is that social judgment, right? And you go, oh, I wasn't ostracized from the tribe. They still look. This is like a kind of step 5 in 12 step. You tell someone all these bad things you've done. They just look at you and they're like bored and they're smoking their cigarette. And you're like, oh, you're not judging me. Cool. Yeah. And then it's,
Yeah. And then for many women, I guess, and for men probably too, but I think this is prevalent in women, is they don't know often how to ask for what they want sexually. And so just to make the little steps, like ask for things that are less charged. Mm-hmm. Would you brush my hair, or would you like stroke the back of my neck? That would feel good to me.
Yeah.
Like little things that are playful and sensual makes it easy to ask for full on, like, quote unquote sexual favors. Because it's not a sexual favor, it's a sexual delight.
Yeah, like, of course, who doesn't want to help their lover, right? So it's usually well received, that even if there's a no, that could be a gateway to intimacy, even in the no, if it's done skillfully. I asked my wife to sew a button on my coat earlier. I have great shame around asking for domestic chores because I was raised by a feminist, and I realized that I feel really loved when my wife sews a button on my coat, even though I can do it myself. And so I asked her to do that, and she did it, and I was like, it's funny the thing we have kind of stuff around, the sexual stuff. That's no problem. But,
you're like, by the way, could you go down on me first before you do that?
just made it easier,
No, but I found when it's hard. It was hard. I was shamed as a child for masturbating. My aunt and my mother barged in one afternoon. I was masturbating. I think it was like 5 years old, and they were like, "Don't ever let us find you doing that again, and that's dangerous and it's sinful." And
wow.
I mean, massively punished and shamed and embarrassed for masturbating, and so it took a long time for me to get over that. And I remember, all the moments looking back that I've asked for what I wanted in bed. It's like that person is overjoyed. I mean, 99%.
So good, isn't it? It's so good.
They're just like, of course I want to fucking do that.
Because mostly we're like insecure going, what do I do? Particularly as a man, I'm like, well, do I do this? And does she like that? And do I use my tongue? Do I kind of use my nose? Like, what's the thing she wants? And then it's like, especially men, it's like, give me some fucking clear directions. Just tell me what you need. Serve. I love you, bitch. Fucking help me out. Like, of course I want to fucking know what you want.
It's so good. So if there's any message I can put out there, if you're, the more you love your body too, the more you love your own body and embrace your body and sensitize your body to pleasure, the easier it is to ask for what you want. That makes you feel good.
Yeah.
So going back to embodiment is like really choosing to have that daily practice, whatever that is for you.
Great. Well, I feel like we've really hopefully put something out there that's positive. My sense is we kind of almost had like a mini gender war, kind of going on, which was really good.
We had a friendly little
exactly
star.
Like it gives me hope that we can actually have these conversations, and it can be robust and it can be civilized, and we don't all have to get triggered, and we can have fucking sense of humor around it, which is the thing I see get missing a lot of the time, around these topics. Is the sense of mutual respect, and I do respect you, and I feel that's mutual, and humor. Like I feel like as long as there's respect and humor, like it's like there's hope, like there's hope that gender wars just aren't going to continue indefinitely. We can actually listen to each other a little bit as well. That's what's gone out the window, I think, lately with politics and everything else.
We're in this together.
We are.
The idea that women don't need men is complete idiocy. I'm sorry, but it's bullshit.
Yeah, I said to one of my feminist friends today, I said, "You'll miss us when we're gone."
It's not. No. We need each other. We do. We need each other. I am not going to be out there doing hard labor, construction work, building buildings. I need men to do that. I need some certain men to do that.
Great.
I want to see feminists go out there and
everyone's a feminist until the shelves need putting up.
I used to identify as a feminist. I don't anymore. I just don't. don't identify with it at all. But, you know, I'd like to see women go and like do the really backbreaking labor that men do, thankless jobs to provide for their families, the unnoticed men, the men that just die young because they've been laboring their whole life. Like, tell me about that. You know, no one's talking about that. That makes me a little angry.
Thank you.
So, yeah.
Okay, so in order to find out more about your awesomeness, where can people go? What should they be Googling, looking up? You know, who should they be swiping right on Tinder? Tell us more.
I'm very active on Facebook. I write a lot. I post a lot. I do videos. I encourage people to come by my Facebook page, Anita Teresa. And the Sex and Medicine website is sexmedsummit.com. And if you want to check out some of the past conference stuff, it's there and on YouTube. And so, but come visit me on Facebook. We shall chat.
And for all the angry American feminists out there with post-modern gender studies degrees, please do not visit me on Facebook, just for the record. Okay, this has been amazing. Do you have a parting one-sentence last message about the body for all of the people out there?
Being embodied, to me, is equivalent to how much energy you can hold in your body and have calibrated and integrated.
Boom. That's the money shot. Nice one. Thank you so much for joining us today. This has been so much fun. You're an absolute star. I hope we become good friends. You're always welcome in Brighton if you want to hang out. So thanks for being on the show today.
Pleasure.
If you enjoyed this episode, subscribe to get more. If you'd like to help us build the Embodied Tribe, leave a review on iTunes or share this on your social media. If you're interested in training globally, sign up to receive the newsletter at embodiedfacilitator.com. Until next time, welcome home to the body.